The following featured presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Resilient Squadron, where we share and discuss the adventures, challenges, and representation of disabled and chronically ill fans across the Star Wars universe. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Resilient Squadron. I'm Greg.
And I'm Jack.
And glad to have you with us again. We're recording this right before the holidays, and we'll be releasing right after in the last week of the year. So hope everybody's had a really good holiday season and are looking forward to a happy new year.
And here's to a good 2021.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like here at the end of the year, I feel like we're getting some of the best Star Wars content and news we've gotten in a long time. And it's made me nothing but like just really happy where we're at and really positive, looking forward to what's coming in the future. You know, we talked about last month that I joked that the Night Owls showing up on Mandalorian had saved 2020. And I think Mando since then has just, took that as a challenge and just multiplied it times 1,000.
Favreau and Filoni heard it.
Yeah, exactly. They must be listening, and they're like, oh yeah? We'll wait till you see Ahsoka, Boba Fett, and then Luke. And that's just made my year.
And guys, if you're listening, Chewbacca series. Just saying.
Hey, we're manifesting it. We're making it happen. Yeah, I mean, we're going to get into later in this episode. Our main topic this month, we're really going to dive into COVID and this year, 2020, what it's been like in terms of the fandom, in terms of the content, and what it's meant to be part of the Star Wars fandom this year. But yeah, as far as how things are going right now, so Jack, what's happened with your work situation? You mind talking about it just a little bit?
Yeah, on the 17th, Governor Wolf announced that there would be a statewide shutdown, which started on Saturday the 19th.
Right.
And will go up until January 4th. And that includes, unfortunately, any businesses within the entertainment industry.
Because you work in a theater.
Exactly, so.
Yeah, it's a rough situation. And I know there's a lot of news coming out about what the studios are doing with theaters and with film distribution. You and I talked before about Warner Brothers' decision and what they were doing, where they're releasing their movies kind of simultaneously, I guess starting with Wonder Woman at Christmas,
right,
where they're putting them out in theaters and on streaming at the same time.
On HBO Max.
Yeah, on HBO Max. Which I know that some of the benefit you mentioned of that is at least they're doing something in the theater. They're not going just straight to streaming.
Right. I mean, it's obviously not ideal, and it's not what any of us that work in the industry wanted.
Right.
But I'll take that over skipping theaters altogether and just going straight to a streaming service.
Yeah.
Right now, like everybody's kind of hurting right now, so you take what you can get.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's basically a crappy situation all around.
Right. But I said I do at least give Warner Brothers some props for making that decision. I don't know why they made that decision. It might be something else, but at least the decision they made is beneficial to the theaters and to them.
Yeah. But the other big thing, I mean, we've recorded some pieces of this podcast already, but there's some other big developments this week, just a few days ago, with the Disney investors call, and they've kind of clarified a lot about what they're doing. It sounds like they're doing two things. One is they're shifting a lot towards streaming, both because of the circumstances and because of how successful streaming has been for them with Mando.
Right.
That they're really kind of doubling down on that and really throwing money into it with like 10 Star Wars shows, similar number of Marvel shows, but still talking about movies. They didn't really get a lot in depth about movies, but it sounded like all their movies are still intended as theatrical releases.
Exactly, right.
But they're also like 2 or 3 years away. So hopefully those will be able to be released in theaters. Hopefully they'll be safe to go. We're going to get more into this topic a little later, but first we want to get in our status report section. You know, as a monthly podcast, we're not going to touch on every news thing that's happened in the past month, but what we like to do is take a few things that we think are very relevant here to what we're talking about. Some of these news items we're going to touch on, especially around like Mandalorian and stuff, we recorded a couple weeks ago. And so you're going to hear that's a little bit out of date. We hadn't at the time seen the last episodes of Mandalorian, so But the major thing that's happened also this month that we want to get into is the Disney investor call that at this point it was a couple weeks ago. So Jack, let's talk about our top three takeaways from that of the things we're looking forward to. You want to go first?
Ahsoka, obviously.
Yeah,
Can't wait for that.
that's my number one also.
Then I would definitely say Bad Batch.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really looking forward to that. And then Visions. Absolutely. I think it sounds like it's going to have a kind of a cool animatrix type vibe to it where it's, it'll be a whole bunch of different artists and their own visions.
Yeah, I know they talked about being like just in sort of anime style approach to it. I hope it's a lot of different, like even within anime, different diverse styles, which is kind of like Animatrix was, like you said. Okay, so yeah, my top three, you actually touched on two of them, but yeah, Ahsoka, for just so many obvious reasons, I'm looking forward to it, but especially as I believe it's like I'm excited to have an Ahsoka show. Loved the episode with her. Filoni did an amazing job, and he's writing this and running it. Um, I'm just really looking forward to more of Ahsoka's journey. I want to know what happens. Where does she go from here? Where has she been? All that kind of stuff, and I hope we get to explore that stuff.
And hopefully, too, it's going to touch on the epilogue of Rebels.
Yeah.
Since they didn't announce, they have yet to announce a Rebels sequel series.
Right.
Hopefully, this will be the Rebels sequel series.
Yeah, exactly. I hope it either is the series and it has all, it's all the characters we're hoping for: Sabine and Ezra and Thrawn. Maybe, certainly sounds like it's going to be a part of it.
Right.
But and then hopefully, if there is like a legit, even full Rebels sequel, maybe still coming, that this could maybe lead into that. And yeah, we talked about Rogue Squadron. That's fascinating to me. I'm actually excited about the fact that besides Patty's history and stuff, I wish we could get the legacy classic Rogue Squadron back in the day with Wedge and Luke and all that. I think you'd have to do it like animated or something to make it work practically. I like the idea.
I don't know. I mean, we did see Wedge. He did make a cameo in Rise of Skywalker.
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, in order to put it during the classic time period of the old Rogue Squadron,
I gotcha. Right.
they'd have to be very expensively de-aging people.
Right.
But I think that the fact that she's doing it into the more post-sequel era, it sounds like that's my impression, is that it's going to be, after Rise of Skywalker. Right. They're talking about being a new era. Mm-hmm. She's talked about taking the themes and the energy and all that stuff, the things we loved about Rogue Squadron, and taking it forward into something new that we haven't seen yet, that's cool to me. That's what I want to see. Mm-hmm. And I think there's that chance of Wedge showing up. Let's see if they can get Dennis to to commit and play the senior, commander leadership role in it or something. That'd be great.
Right. And I do want to say one thing too, is like, although the Force stuff that we've seen in Mandalorian, I'm really hoping that we truly do get a movie or series that has nothing to do with.
Yeah, nothing to do with the Force, nothing to do with Skywalkers. I mean, a lot of these spin-off type shows that sound more sort of gritty and real, it evokes Rogue One for me, which I think nailed all that. It touched a little bit of Force stuff, but it's like, that wasn't what it was about. You can't do Star Wars without acknowledging the existence of those things, but...
Right, but you don't have to go full-blown into it.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
Showing Force users and lightsabers and mentioning Skywalkers.
Yep.
You can definitely avoid all that and make it its own thing within the universe and still have it be Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly. Then, the final thing I'm really looking forward to wasn't an announcement at the time, because we've known about it, but it was sort of, I guess, the official thing and logo was for Taika Waititi's movie. Mm-hmm. I just can't wait. I can't imagine what he's going to come up with. I really hope the idea of bringing him on is going to give him just free reign to do something amazing and different. His episode of Mandalorian surprised me from the standpoint of, like, I know he's a great filmmaker and he can do a lot of heart and a lot of seriousness. I know he can fit certain formats. His episode was not what I expected from him. I thought it was going to be more of a really wild Ragnarok style adventure thing and comedy, but it wasn't. It was another Mandalorian episode, but it had a lot of great little moments in it and a lot of cool, fun, different style of action and stuff. but that still fit within the show.
Hmm.
I actually hope with the movies, I think he could do the same thing with the movie that still looks like a Star Wars movie and feels like it has the same kind of humor and additional stuff. But I would actually love to see him do even more of a crazy Star Wars movie.
Well, do you want to hear my pitch?
Yeah.
Now, bear with me. 4 Sith Padawans, and they're the worst Sith ever. They have a documentary crew following them.
Well, what we do in the dark side.
Yeah, what we do on the dark side.
I would love that. That's exactly what they should be doing. But we had some unfortunate news this month as well. We had the passing of a couple of legends. First, David Prowse, who played Darth Vader in the first 3 movies. And we also lost Jeremy Bulloch, who played Boba Fett in the original trilogy. And they're both a big loss for the fan community because they were both really active, in the conventions and the fan circuits. And they were also just had really great interactions with fans. There have been so many great stories from both of them. We do want to dive a little bit more into David Prowse's history because, as we learn more about him, there's a lot that he went through and a lot that is really relevant to the topics we talk about here. So besides obviously playing Darth Vader and some other known roles that he had, I don't know if you knew that I guess he went for the role of Superman at the time that he didn't get, but he actually ended up doing personal training for Christopher Reeve to prepare for Superman.
Yeah, I didn't know that at all.
That was really cool, I thought. And also he was really well known as the Green Cross Code Man, which was a big thing in the UK where he do public service announcements regularly to promote safety crossing streets and stuff. We know that he battled arthritis, but I didn't realize that he dealt with arthritis from a very young age. He was misdiagnosed, and he spent 18 months in a hospital as they tried to figure out what was going on with his legs. But they apparently thought for years for a year or more that he had tuberculosis, but turned out that he actually had early onset osteoarthritis, which started significantly impairing him. And what he got interested in was weightlifting, and that led him into bodybuilding, and he excelled at that. It helped alleviate a lot of his symptoms and problems, and obviously then led him into movie roles and eventually Vader. So it was cool that, we don't always say that we overcome conditions. It's more like we alleviate them or deal with them. But it sounds like he was able to take what he had experienced and turn it into, obviously, a great career. But I know the problems with arthritis and other health issues came back years later and eventually resulted in like paralysis and a number of surgeries he had to have. Eventually started having to use a wheelchair. And I saw a story from, and I'm sure this is common, but I saw a story from Brian Young, who goes by Swankmotron, from the Full of Sith podcast. He mentioned on the podcast and in a Twitter thread this story about when he hosted a panel at one of the conventions where both David and Peter Mayhew, who played Chewbacca, were guests, featured guests on the panel, and both of them were using wheelchairs, and neither of them could get up on the stage because it was completely inaccessible. And I know you've probably had experiences like that plenty of times, right?
Yeah, actually, it's a few years ago. Some friends and I, we're all in wheelchairs. We were going to a car show, and at this particular car show, they had celebrity guests, and all the guests were on these platforms, and there was maybe like 1 or 2 steps to get onto the platforms to meet these celebrities. But of course, if you're in a wheelchair, that's all it takes. I mean, 1 step is too many steps.
Right.
And I wanted to meet a professional wrestler, and my 2 other friends wanted to meet a NASCAR driver. And we both got in our respective lines. And when it came their turn to meet him, he did not come down. And I don't want to speculate as to why.
Right.
But when it came my turn to meet this wrestler,
yeah,
maybe about a couple months previous to this show, she had legitimately, not a storyline, but legitimately blew her knee out during a match. So when she was at this show, she was in a full leg brace.
Okay.
But not only did she come down the steps, she signed her book that she had recently published. I think she even signed an 8x10 glossy.
That's so great.
She took pictures with me. She talked to me, and didn't complain once. Didn't even like it. It was a non-issue. The bigger issue is that had they not had those platforms in the first place, none of this would have happened.
Yeah. Yeah, and it says a lot too, just that these, much less for fans, especially for actual event guests, featured guests, to not be able to, get up on a stage or something because no one had prepared for that or was able to accommodate it quickly or had even just designed it that way to begin with, which should be the default. But yeah, given all that, I mean, Prowse, he went through a lot. He dealt with cancer some years later, and eventually passed from COVID, unfortunately, which is just yet another tragic COVID loss. Of course, the other big thing happening right now in Star Wars is Mandalorian, and we should point out that we are recording right now on Thursday the 10th. Our episode won't be released for another week and a half, so we have 2 episodes to go with Mandalorian, with the next one airing tomorrow. So you lucky listeners, by the time you're listening to this, you will already know how the season ends and what's happening.
No spoilers, please.
No, don't spoil it for us in the comments, because we're a week and a half behind you and we don't want to know, and that's how time works. But yeah, we do want to touch really quick on the last couple episodes and some of the themes that came up and what's going on with the show. We'll probably speculate a little bit and see if we're right. And we definitely 100% will not go back and edit in the correct answers. So I mean, the main big thing, okay, well, there's 2. The first big thing was the reveal of Ahsoka in live action. And be honest, Jack, did you cry when she showed up?
I came close, definitely.
It was pretty emotional.
The only thing I think kind of spoiled it for me was the scoop from back past spring. I think, had that scoop not been put all over the internet.
Yeah, that's one of the ones where I get it, putting it out there, but man,
right.
If we had just started this episode, there would have been anticipation. Mm-hmm. We would have been building up to...
Who's this Jedi?
Yeah, well, Bo-Katan had mentioned her name. Right. The name drop would have hit us even more.
Right.
And then to go into this episode, and just in the first 5 seconds, we see Ahsoka in live action, played by Rosario Dawson, and have not known anything about that. Exactly. Would have been just an unbelievable experience. So I'm definitely bummed that happened.
Because even the day of, they still had not said Rosario is playing Ahsoka.
I mean, until their names were in the credits, they didn't even say that it was her. But certainly been rumored for a while. We do want to acknowledge, before getting into the topic of Ahsoka and some of the themes we want to discuss with her, the fact that it's well known there are these allegations against Rosario in terms of trans violence and transphobia. And, there have been new developments in that case, but we still don't know the whole story. So it's something I think we want to hold off on commenting on for now, while also acknowledging that people do feel impacted by this. And I mean, it's really important. I think we kind of need to wait and see what happens with it. And it's probably even more of a topic now with just today. We should mention, while recording, they've had the Disney investor call and announced a bunch of new stuff, including an Ahsoka live action show starring Rosario. And that's just another, salt in the wound to some people who are really, really bothered by this. So we definitely want to acknowledge that. And we're not necessarily in a position to talk about it. But certainly if people would like us to talk about it more, just let us know. But also we'd love to hear from listeners and fans who are impacted by this, what they think. We're listening and we want to amplify those voices. But so I think we can focus on the character of Ahsoka and the writing and the themes. You had said a lot about, Jack, when we talked about Ahsoka showing up and with Grogu, about how there seems to be sort of this history of trauma that's affected them both, that connects them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's pretty clear to say that Ahsoka is still kind of dealing with the loss of Anakin, per se.
Yeah.
And I know it was kind of a creative writing thing for her to not say his name. It
Right.
was more impactful not to say it. But at the same time, from a character standpoint, I think it was more so the fact that maybe she even to this day cannot utter the words Anakin Skywalker because she's still so traumatized by it.
Yeah, I think it could have come about either way, I think, being either a conscious decision creatively for her character, but also I'm sure there's a number of decisions made in terms of her and Grogu and others about the focus of the show, it just not being necessarily relevant, and also being for an audience, a general audience that may not know that background.
Right. And also, too, even the fact that she said no,
Yeah,
she won't train him. And one of the big reasons, obviously, she wasn't going to train him is because it would have been irresponsible of her
right.
with his abandonment and anger issues. But also, too, it 100% came back to Anakin and the fact that she was still dealing with it and probably also too didn't want to be responsible
Yeah, right.
for anything that may happen if Grogu did go down a dark path under her mentorship.
Yeah, exactly, which has been just kind of informed by her experience and trauma. I think it's interesting timing, and I'm sure it was not unintentional that we saw season 7 of the Clone Wars air earlier this year,
Mhm.
which also ended on a note of spoilers for Clone Wars. If you didn't know that it ends with Order 66, you can imagine the effect and trauma that would have on Ahsoka anyway. And we were really, as she, we see her walk away, she's clearly very, very heavily impacted by that, which then carries over to Rebels and the face off with Anakin. Now we're looking at several years later.
Mm.
She's got that lingering trauma.
Right. And now he's dead.
Yeah,
And they never got to, as far as we know, they never got to
right.
resolve their friendship, mend their relationship.
Yep. Although I'm going to throw out the speculation now. We just got the news that Hayden's coming back for the Kenobi series in whatever form he's going to be in that. I imagine that's going to be some kind of vision, memory, force thing or something. It says as Vader. I'm not sure what that means, but
Mhm.
um,
Well, isn't Kenobi going to take place between 3 and 4?
yes. The fact that Hayden is back, I wonder if he might now show up as like a force ghost for
Yeah.
Ahsoka in her own series post Return of the Jedi.
I would absolutely love that.
That would be amazing. And I could see it happening, The Force Ghosts tend to show up for people who they're connected deeply with.
Yeah, so John, Dave, if you guys are listening, make it happen.
We know they listen to the podcast, so yeah, and also she touched on, it's kind of connected to that. I think part of what she recognizes is that the attachment issues that Grogu had, she acknowledged and talked about a lot of the trauma that she picked up from him from being hidden away after the fall of the Jedi Temple, specifically mentioning some dark times that he doesn't clearly remember or doesn't want to acknowledge.
Right.
Well, that's clear.
Plus, that's almost 30 years of history.
Yeah,
We don't know what happened to him. I mean, like I said, we know obviously he survived Order 66 and he was smuggled out of the Jedi Temple and off Coruscant by somebody, but
we don't know what happened to them.
between that and what's going on right now, we have no clue. So
Yeah,
anything could happen to him.
yeah. So it's going to be interesting to explore that more. And even in the last episode, for us, the tragedy, the separation of Grogu and Din, I think is a really emotional point. Now, again, another major event for him.
Absolutely.
And you could even see him lashing out, which I think he's going to do, in that situation anyway. But there may be that underlying element of, he's found family, found a home, some stability. I actually was listening to another podcast that I definitely highly recommend called Pink Milk, which is hosted by a gay couple who are really fun to listen to. One's a diehard fan, one's a more casual fan following along. The main host, Brian, in the last episode talking about this episode, the tragedy, they talked about how the show in general, they've really connected to the show as a story of fathers and adoption and children and trauma and their own experiences with both personally and with multiple kids that they've adopted. And I think maybe they said they might have fostered. And there's a lot of overlap there in those situations where they talked about experiences they've had and that they've seen with kids being taken away from certain different circumstances, good or bad, being put in foster environments, being taken out of those foster environments, and how traumatizing and difficult that is. And Brian, the host, really got quite emotional on the episode. It's really impactful to listen to. Really had a strong emotional response to Grogu being taken. And also, like we're talking about, the Razor Crest getting destroyed, because that was a home that they had found together or developed together. This little family unit, the first real stable home that either of them have ever had. Even being on the run and going and traveling, going place to place, they've got this home now, and now that's destroyed and taken away.
Of course, with that episode, there was also a huge character moment focused on Boba Fett.
Oh, yeah. Whether it's intentional or not, there's that more connotation there about fathers and sons and losses, and I'm sure he felt that, that loss of Grogu being taken and then their ship being lost. He's been through losing his father.
And so he knows what Grogu's going through.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, and as we learned afterwards, he probably didn't realize this at the time, but it'll be interesting to explore that this is another foundling. Right. And this is a character who hates Jedi.
Right.
But also now is going to possibly relate to Grogu as another foundling, or at least his father was.
Which we found out that Jango,
yeah.
If you haven't watched it yet, we found out Jango was a foundling.
Yeah, exactly.
And I also want to point out something, too, that you mentioned to me, I think last week, is that much like Din and Grogu were a clan of two.
Yeah.
For 10 years, Jango and Boba were a clan of two.
Yeah.
So there's even that to kind of...
Yep. Yeah, it's so many cool connotations and repetitions. Yeah. For our first big topic on one of these monthly podcasts, we want to sort of summarize the impact of the COVID pandemic on the Star Wars fandom and its creative endeavors and the releases, and how the fandom has benefited from Star Wars being there and the community being there for each other.
And our goal here is really not to look for pity or any type of sympathy, and we're not really here to blame anybody, but we just are trying to gather a better understanding of what's actually going on.
Yeah, I think we have a particular insight from our experiences and also just being involved in the communities that we're in to see what's happened and look to appreciate some of what's been there, and also to be able to really look at what's happened and how it's affected everyone, and especially this community in particular. So talking about some of the major impacts, I'd say probably the biggest impacts for the Star Wars fan community at large is the changes and the cancellations of a lot of big events, especially Star Wars Celebration this year. That was those only happen every few years, right? So
right.
That was a big change. I think they've pushed it back now to 2022. And also every other, pretty much every other convention.
I was supposed to do a show back in May, and it got postponed to May of 2021. Hopefully that still happens. I think there's still hope. But
yeah.
And then Steel City Con, which happens 3 times a year here in Pittsburgh, it was supposed to take place last weekend. So they're shooting for April. But again, it's kind of up in the air. So
yeah, those like time frames in like the spring, early summer, they seem kind of like tentatively okay at this point. With
there's still hope.
Yeah, there's hope. Yeah, I'll mention really quick. Like we've talked about a future topic. We want to have some specific guests on to talk about conventions and events and planning that around accessibility and accommodations. And I think you're going to be seeing really on top of that topic expanding to incorporate overall health concerns and safety. And that's kind of interesting. And one theme throughout this topic in general of COVID that we're going to hit on a number of times is the fact that a lot of changes are happening that they have already needed.
Right now, we're all in the same boat.
Right.
So it's taken a global pandemic to open people's eyes. But hey, at least, people's eyes are being opened and there are changes, and hopefully, some of these changes when the world gets back to normal, will stay intact.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But there's also been a big impact, even like on small local events, any kind of fan meetups besides just conventions and even smaller, shows.
Even the lightsaber meetups and the droid meetups, those are all been virtual.
Yeah, those have all gone virtual. Also, like for example, the 501st and the other large costuming groups do troops.
And we've actually had the 501st come to the theater for almost all of our premieres of the Star Wars movies.
Yeah, so it's like when they go to any kind of scheduled event, they get invited, or they do volunteer work. They go to hospitals, parades, openings, yeah, conventions, all that kind of stuff. Now, I follow them on social media. I've seen a lot of posts from different groups where they are slowly going back out,
Mm-hmm.
visiting kids in hospitals,
Right.
maybe going to some small events,
Mm-hmm.
fully masked, keeping distance, all that kind of stuff.
I'm currently working on my own Sith cosplay,
Yeah,
and it will incorporate a mask. Just for the look, but I am going to incorporate some material inside so that it'll function as a COVID mask as well.
So one of the other big effects of this has been obviously on the parks of Galaxy's Edge at both Disney World and Disneyland, and Disneyland as of right now is still not open as far as Galaxy's Edge.
Well, right now at Disneyland, only Downtown Disney is open.
Yep. And so the droids you can buy them pre-built, but you can also you go and you build your own droid, and it's like you're taking part in that experience. You go build a lightsaber and go through this whole great ritual type thing with the lightsabers. It's an amazing experience,
Mm-hmm.
and they really want you to have that. But COVID and the impact all this has had has really forced them to break that.
Right.
I would say illusion or that intended immersion, which is unfortunate, but has also meant it's opened up all those products to people outside.
When we went, again, we spent an absurd amount of money, so neither one of us actually got to build a droid.
Yeah.
But now that Disney started selling them on their website back in this past spring, I was able to acquire an R2 unit.
Mm-hmm.
And then for my birthday, you bought me a BB unit.
Yep.
So now I actually have both styles of droids that are available there.
Yeah.
Obviously, I didn't get to build them.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
But through my artwork, I was able to sort of do that because I've customized them completely to be 100% my own original droids. So in a sense, I did kind of build them.
You got to build them in your way. Yeah. And let's come back to that a little bit later about the droids, because that's a cool thing about what's going on right now too. But yeah, it's really true that it's one of these, like you said, they're kind of just having to sacrifice some of that immersion. You can buy the droids, you're able to get a hold of them because they're great little toy and devices and interactive and everything. But basically they have R2D2 and they have BB-8.
Mm-hmm.
You're not building your own custom version.
Right.
You're not putting it together. You're not activating and doing all that fun stuff.
Right.
But on the other hand, people who can't go there and do that, or haven't been able to, or probably won't be able to for a while, are getting access to some of that stuff.
And I do want to mention too, I want to give a shout out to all the quote unquote smugglers out there and all the different communities. Basically, the smugglers are people who live near the parks, are willing to go pick up these products for anybody that can't. Again,
Exactly. These are fans. They want to share these things with fans who aren't able to get them, and they've been really active on some of the Facebook groups we're in. I'd say more so later since like, especially since only Walt Disney World's Galaxy's Edge is open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other big impact I would say that has happened, we really kind of already touched on earlier, and has to do with the release schedules.
Just give a little insight. What is holding up theatrical releases right now is that there are two biggest markets, which are Manhattan and California.
Right.
Their governors of New York State and California have not reopened, so the studios are kind of holding back and waiting until those two states are reopened before
Yeah.
they start putting major releases back into theaters.
I don't think people appreciate or recognize enough that there are a significant number of fans who are unable to attend things in person, whether it's events or parks or conventions or even movies in the theater, whether it's challenging due to accessibility needs or if people are just in such a debilitated state due to illness or disability that they aren't mobile enough to go to a theater.
Or lack of transportation.
Yeah.
Like I know here in Pittsburgh, we have a company called Access.
Mm-hmm.
They're a door-to-door service that has wheelchair lifts. And but I know not every single city has something like that.
For sure. Yeah, I don't believe we have anything like that around here. It's sort of a combination of due to medical reasons and accommodation needs, and also potentially all of the financial impact that has on that population, which is something we'll be hitting on periodically here on this podcast, is that, again, not enough people, I think, realize that along with medical conditions and disabilities often comes limited incomes, massive medical bills, and a lot of financial problems that can limit your options and your ability to do things on top of the physical limitations and challenges. And so it's appealing to me in a large way. I go to the movies, I go to the theater, but I have a number of friends in my patient community and even close friends of mine who are not able to go to the theater. Mm-hmm. And these are serious fans. Like, these are lifelong, hardcore fans who, even in some cases, even for mental health reasons, for trauma or something, are unable to go to the theater to see these films on the big screen, even as much as they would like to. And so to see some things coming to streaming, not necessarily the movies, but to some extent movies too, but just to see high quality content put out on streaming and available from home, for people who even can afford that, is kind of groundbreaking in a way. But yeah, I think it'd be cool if people recognize that. I mean, just look at Mandalorian and the fact that we are getting live action Star Wars at home.
Exactly.
And in a way that everyone can experience and appreciate it at the same time, for the most part, with some differences. But and it's accessible content. It's really, my understanding, I'm speaking from what I've heard and what I've understood, but we always welcome input on this. But it's a very accessible show. They have between captions and I believe most shows like that on Disney have descriptive audio, which is great. When you go to a theater, I've heard so many horror stories from people who have dealt with those physical, and you know more about this than I do, but just from the stories I've seen of people who've gone and the descriptive audio doesn't work, the captions don't work right, or they struggle to get that access or the seats they need.
We have both. We have the headsets, if you want to wear those so you can hear the audio better, and then we also have the closed captioning devices, where it's just a device you can put it in the cup holder and you can read the closed captioning.
But I mean, yeah, we talked about the fact that even when your theater was open, y'all took extreme safety in mind.
We do actually, yeah. I mean, I am there every single shift for usually 4 hours a day, cleaning top to bottom.
Yeah.
And, my coworkers are doing the same thing. And safety and cleanliness is our main priority. It always has been.
Not even more
but
so.
But now, even more so, because of COVID, we've taken even further measures.
Yeah, like it's another case where there's another good example where things are benefiting a lot of chronically ill folks, where even the fact that we're wearing masks all the time, like I've known a lot of people who already wore masks all the time because of immunocompromised systems. I saw a lot of people when masks first started becoming a thing with COVID and coronavirus that they're like, well, I've been wearing a mask for years. Here's how I do it. Here's where I get mine.
Right.
And that is a lot of the frustration from a lot of the disabled community and chronically ill folks and people with immune system issues when people are arguing against masks and things like that. Because not only are those people putting compromised folks and people at risk, at even more risk, but also they are arguing against something that is the norm for a lot of people already anyway.
Exactly.
There are people I know who don't step out of the house without a mask on. And now people are saying I can't put one on for a few minutes to walk into a store, or I can't breathe, And it's aggravating and also to some extent insulting, especially compounded by the fact that you're risking people even more.
Exactly.
But to say that you can't maybe have a respiratory issue, and there are very much legitimate issues in wearing masks for some people, and that's a difficult topic and a challenge for those people to consider whether or not they should be going anywhere in that case.
And one thing along the same lines I want to bring up social media, but the people that were creating these ADA get out of jail free cards for masks, and that they're actually hurting the cause.
They absolutely are.
Yeah, and it's just
the ADA and accommodations in general are difficult for people to already get now. The ADA in the United States was passed 30 years ago, just had its 30th anniversary, and it's still oftentimes an afterthought, or just not, it's something people aren't always aware of. They might be ignorant to it when they are opening facilities or setting things up in venues or for events without thinking about the needs of disabled folks. We talked earlier about the convention story with David Prowse and Peter Mayhew not being able to get up on a stage. Like, to me at this point, that shouldn't even enter anybody's mind that you wouldn't set things up in a way that would allow anybody that kind of access. But that's also coming from me with my experience, my exposure, knowing you, knowing others who have gone through that and who deal with that.
Right. Like I said, it really is opening people's eyes.
Which is a big part of what we're trying to do here.
Right.
But then you have people who come along and want to essentially abuse the ADA and take advantage of it and use it as an excuse to further endanger themselves and others under pretenses that the ADA and principles of accommodation don't apply to. It's pretty clear most of those people do not have any significant problems that require accommodation. But I also think it's important to focus on a lot of the benefits of Star Wars right now for fans in general, including disabled fans, chronically ill fans, healthy fans. Everyone has essentially been affected by this pandemic.
And I'll say even the studios.
Sure, yeah, right. Creative teams, everyone involved throughout the franchise on all sides of it have been massively impacted by all this, but also have benefited from the Star Wars franchise and the universe and the fandom and the community at the same time. So, for example, like Jack, you've told me that based on the fact that when we went to Galaxy's Edge last year, we came back and we're both pretty enthused and really interested in diving more into the Star Wars creative world and doing something in the community, which is kind of what brought about this project, both initially on social media. The fact that we talked a lot at the time, around that time, about disabilities in Star Wars and the representation and the community, what the franchise meant to fans and how it affected their fandom. And it seems like the pandemic then took that and really almost motivated us in a way to really dive into that stuff even further, which is one of the things that's led to this podcast, for example. But I know that you had said, like, can you tell us a little bit about how it affected your creativity and your artwork?
Yeah. Well, as I've mentioned before, I know I'm battling depression.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in the past few years that depression has definitely affected my art, where I just don't really have the motivation to draw or do anything. I'm mostly an illustrator.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, my love, something I did every day and it was amazing. Just like, it almost felt like work.
Right.
But then with Galaxy's Edge, really, that's where it started. And I turned my focus into creating, modifying, and customizing different things. For example, where it all started was our data pads.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was something that, I really wanted to do, since we were planning on bounding and really immersing ourselves. If we were going to the Galaxy's Edge and really doing this, we were going to go all out.
Right. Exactly. We were going all in on the in-universe feel. And
right. And so then I started making our data pads. I learned a lot from them. And then later on this past spring, when Disney started selling their droids online, I bought mine and then you bought me one. And that just opened the doors. And then also, too, shout out to Dan Flores
Mm-hmm.
and all the people at Mubo's Droid Builders.
Yeah, Dano.
Yeah, Dan is awesome. They all have inspired me more than they will ever realize to focusing my art in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And that also ultimately led to the creation of our mascot, RESQ, or Rescue.
Exactly.
You came across the Hasbro remote control version of Dio. And the really cool thing about that one, and what really just drew us to it, is it had these little, for lack of a better word, training wheels
Right.
on the front and rear.
Because it's such a challenge to get that one wheel to balance and stay up and move.
Exactly. And we're like, you know what? That would be absolutely perfect, because then we wouldn't have to, hide them.
Yeah.
We could actually utilize them.
Right.
And I think we came up with the idea basically that his balance motivator was damaged
Mm-hmm.
when he was constructed in the factory.
Yeah.
So we played with that, and I incorporated the wheels. And again, with customizing, I took that Dio and I built a physical rescue.
You did all this work for the most part with my kind of input and feedback.
We bounced ideas back and forth.
Yeah, I'd say it's like a collaborative, creative effort, and you just did a lot of the work, a lot of physical work, and but at the same time, we concurrently did the physical Dio that you were designing and building based on Dio,
Mm-hmm.
but also a graphical version that we've used for our logo, which you can see right here on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We added headphones for the podcast purposes, but basically that's our mascot Rescue, and we want to have a little mascot. We decided at one point we wanted to be a droid. And we try to figure out like what makes sense. So like how can we represent disabilities in a droid?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we kind of thought through the idea of whether it makes sense, canonically or not, to have another Dio based droid. Because I know that he was like one of a kind in the movie supposedly, but
Right.
We figured maybe another droid might be built based on him or a line of droids. But we wanted to convey some of the themes and ideas that we had around what the show's about. And we came across at some point, there was a lot of discussion about the character of the droid Dio after Rise of Skywalker came out, and the fact that he clearly had some trauma and history of trauma that he was dealing with, and that Rey helped him with, and probably BB-8 helped him with, that to get him to open up and accept them and communicate more. And
well, that's the thing too. You got to think about, especially in Star Wars. You care about the droids just as much, if not even more, than the biological characters.
A lot of times, yeah. But yeah, since Resilient Squadron came about, I think it's been just like, for me, like a great creative outlet and a great motivator to feel like I'm doing something right now. I think even when we first talked about doing this and starting up the social media channels, I had an initial reluctance. Once COVID became a big problem, a little internal debate about like, should we be doing something like this? Like, is right now the right time to be launching something new? But I think we really struck on the idea that this was really the right time for it, because not only was it a good outlet for us, but also because COVID was affecting everyone, and it was something we could also then talk about on top of everything else.
Right.
Because in a sense, COVID has sort of brought everyone to the same shared experience that a lot of us with disabilities and chronic illness have already felt and have already experienced in our daily lives. So people who are now quarantine isolated at home, feeling locked in, can't leave your house without risking your health, not having access to places to go, things like that. That's the experience a lot of us have had for years, and it's sort of now a bigger shared experience and insight, I think, that I hope people do take away from that, from this whole experience, that this is the norm for many, and that as much as the community and the creative community in Lucasfilm and other official events and organizers can continue to use these like distribution channels and approaches to involved in the community, they're more inclusive of everyone, the better for everyone it's going to be.
Right.
Like as we mentioned last month, this podcast really came about because of the Force Fest, which was organized, I think, mostly by Richard and Sarah Orlowski from Skywalking Network that we're a part of now. And that was a great example of a case where they created this virtual fan event that was created as sort of a fan-run alternative to Celebration. And they had a number of great panels and great discussions and interviews, some fun events at night, trivia and all that kind of stuff. And that was really cool because a lot of fans, like we talked about earlier, who can't go to those events have never been able to have those. There's been lots of virtual stuff before, but not to this extent, and not to the extent that a lot of big official conventions have shifted online this year. And I hope that as the pandemic presumably winds down eventually, that some of these virtual aspects of events continue so that more fans can get to take part in them.
Exactly.
We actually asked before this podcast recording, we put out the question to our readers and listeners what their story is, what their Star Wars fandom story has been during COVID, how the fandom has affected them and how it's been affected by COVID. And we got some great responses. I have a few examples here, like from, I'm going to say Jennifer Marquin on Twitter messaged us to share her whole story, especially having to do with her son, who's a big fan, and who I guess, she was like Star Wars, she said, but never was a serious fan until recently. But since COVID hit, he's been homeschooling, and they now have all this time together, and he's been teaching her Star Wars, and now she's a super fan. Said she herself is on disability for a number of reasons, and she says here, even though I was home all the time before, now he is too. We've been forced to slow down, not go out nearly at all, and have the blessing of spending so much time together that it's been great for her fandom. And she went to Force Fest and had a great time, and she's met so many new Star Wars friends and gotten into some awesome podcasts, connecting with amazing people, and found a whole great community of friends and people to connect with virtually. And she says, some days I know Star Wars and my Star Wars friends are the only thing keeping me sane, which I think is what a lot of us can relate to.
Exactly.
Your friend TC wrote on Facebook, responded to one of our posts, talking about how Star Wars is something that he's always been able to connect to and a place to escape to, a place to connect with heroes on an emotional level, and a place to take a break from the worries of the real world. And he says, and I'm able to share my love of this world with all the other fans, and this has just been magnified during the pandemic, which I think is cool. Cool in the sense that having that is great.
Right.
And he goes on to say, specifically, like having so much free time during the pandemic has largely been taken up by Star Wars related activities as well. I play multiple tabletop model games with my buddies, such as Star Wars Legions, X-Wing, and I recently got into Armada. I bought a few more Lego Star Wars sets, which took up 90% of his Lego collection as a kid. I've been seriously debating getting into costuming as well, and I've even gone as far as 3D printing some armor pieces, which is really cool.
That's the thing too. He is talking about Lego, and you and I are both in pretty much the middle right now of our 2020 Star Wars Lego Advent calendars,
which is like a highlight of my year, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, no,
it's amazing.
They release it on September 1st, and I always pre-order it on September 1st, even though I know there's no problem. I can go to Walmart and there'll be tons of them in stock, but every single year I pre-order it.
Yeah, and I mean that's something I do with my kid. My daughter's growing into a Star Wars fan, and she has her own separate Advent that she opens of a line of dolls, but she's excited about me opening mine to see what I have and what I build and helping me build them. And it's been a really cool connection. Every year it has been, but this year, every little thing like that is just more special to have.
And even going back to Lego, I know I haven't bought a Lego set in a long time, but for a while, I was buying them left and right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's one of those things too where you're so involved, and really any of my art projects and anything like that as well, especially with Lego builds, is you're so focused on putting it together because you got to read the instructions and sort the pieces, and so it really does help you focus on the build and kind of distract you from bills
Yeah.
or COVID or what have you, and it's a really nice distraction,
Right.
and a good distracting tool.
And man, just a couple of the ones on the advent calendar this year have been really tough. Taking a
Right.
lot of attention on those.
Yeah, Lego, you got to do a better job with your diagrams.
Right. And they got to keep them simple in that box, but man.
This is coming from two 44-year-old men.
Right. And we got some really cool words from Jim Scooby Meyer, who said that Star Wars has been a huge help to me during the pandemic. Star Wars has always been a source of joy, but during a challenging time like 2020, it's been a life preserver for sure. And he mentions this Facebook group that we're also in called Star Wars Celebration Anaheim 2022, and talks a lot about the benefits of that group and all the things that they do. But he especially says it has been a great source of togetherness during this time. They're super welcoming to all, and the admins work to make it a friendly and safe place for all. Star Wars fans are truly like family.
And we just want to remind everybody that these are our opinions and our thoughts on these subjects. But one of the biggest things that we want for Resilient Squadron is to hear from you, because we are a community. We are all together, and we have differences of opinions, and we want to share those differences because that's how you learn, and that's how you grow.
And yeah, especially about any particular topic we've talked about. Anything you want to share, if you want to share your own story about Star Wars during COVID, then great, we'd love to hear it. But any other topics too.
I also want to add too, if you guys have any topic ideas, please send them our way, and we'll discuss it in a future show.
Mm-hmm.
Even like again, we talked about a couple of the incidents and things going on with certain actors within the community. We obviously didn't want to touch on it too much, but if you do, for example, want to have us talk about it, just let us know, and we will.
Yeah, and you can reach out to us on social media. We're Resilient Squadron on Facebook and Instagram, and at Resilient Squad on Twitter. Also, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes, because that'll really help us out a lot. We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can also find other great shows like Talking Apes, classic Marvel Star Wars comics, the Max Effects podcast, Neverland Clubhouse, and the flagship show Skywalking Through Neverland. And we hope you've all had a happy holidays and are going to have a great new year. And we look forward to talking to you next month. Oh, and Mark Hamill, please return our calls so we can have you as a guest on the show. We know you obviously have to get a babysitter for Grogu now, but, we can make it work.